That was fun. And even when we didn't have the words up right, y'all knew the songs. I didn't, but you knew the songs. Will you pray with me? Oh, holy and gracious God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations on all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight. For you, O God, you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So the past few weeks, we've been looking at the key ministry areas that we lifted up last year as a result of the listening tour. So we've learned more about what's going on with student ministries, both a look back and a look ahead. We learned more about children's ministries, and last week we learned an awful lot more about missions, especially about where we're going in that area. And so this Sunday, I wanted to lift up our senior adult ministries. Now, I'm not sure how many of you ordinarily read 1 Timothy. I will acknowledge to you that there are parts that I stop reading, especially the one that says I shouldn't be standing here before you teaching. My gender would have prohibited that if we followed 1 Timothy literally. But Timothy has a lot to say. This is actually, we could get into this, let's not. It's understood that Paul wrote this. It's understood that maybe Paul didn't write this. Let's agree that whoever did write this wrote this in the name and spirit of what they understood of Paul. Okay, is that fair? All right, so Paul is writing to his, I'm going to assume, young friend Timothy, and it's not a letter that's just for Timothy to hear. It's a letter to be read in the churches. But it was one where he was trying not only to help Timothy understand his role and responsibilities, but to help the churches that Timothy was serving to hear kind of how Timothy had been instructed and to be aware of perhaps their own role. And I love this particular chapter, parts of it. I appreciate what he's trying to explain to Timothy here when it comes to how you work and minister with and for your elders. So this could have been a letter to 1 Timothina, right? But Paul is seeking to give wisdom to this one who has come to lead this congregation. And he's really focused on the wisdom and the role of the elders of the church. And by the elders of the church, please don't take that in the current context that we use in the Methodist Church, where you have to go through this, 50-year process to get ordained. That's not what he's talking about. He's, in our context, we call it senior adults. We can come up with another word. That's entirely up to you. I imagine in a few years I'll get to weigh in on what we call ourselves, right? But I haven't, I guess, now I will say that if we had kept going with this and we were talking more about the widows, the threshold was 60 years old. So not quite there, but I'm getting there. I'm working my way towards it. But we're looking at what Paul shares with Timothy about our elders, our senior adults, and there are two pieces to this that I think are critical for us. He's trying to help order the church in a way that the church is functioning well, and he's also trying to help families order well and function well. And friends, we are a church and we are a family, and so it does us well to listen to these words and see how these words can apply to us today. And I see two things in what Timothy is talking about, or what Paul is saying to Timothy, that I think are pretty critical for us. And the first one is this idea of wisdom and mentoring. We hear about the widows being called to teach. We hear about learning respect and all of these things. What we don't hear in this is the word wisdom. But I want you to understand the word wisdom is all in this. If we look at the context in which Paul is writing, this is a time and a culture and a society that understood that it's more senior members with their advantage of having life experience and having learned and lived had gained wisdom, and that wisdom had value, and that wisdom was to be passed on and shared and nurtured and mentored in those who had not yet had those years of learning and experience and simply living. We don't seem to talk a whole lot about the wisdom of our elders much in our culture, do we? Or is that just a misconception on my part? And yet we recognize that there is such value in the wisdom of those who have lived and failed and learned and succeeded and continued to move forward and been willing to be introspective in such a way. So understand, when I talk about the wisdom that our elders, our senior adults have to offer, I'm not simply talking about knowledge. Knowledge is important, and knowledge is even kind of hard to find right now as it is. Knowledge gets lost in all of the information that's out there, right? You can have knowledge about a lot of things that isn't really knowledge. True? I mean, because we can get information on just about anything. Go ahead, Google it. Right? Right? You can come up with information on anything. Knowledge is helpful because it helps you to order and apply what you know to a circumstance, but wisdom's different. Wisdom is more than just knowledge. Wisdom is that knowledge along with the insight of what it means to have lived life. And so for those of you who would consider yourselves our senior adults, my charge to you is you have wisdom, and we are in need of your mentoring. We are coming up on that fun time of year where, at least in the office, we get really excited when we start talking about year-end reports and charge conferences and and budget and it's a fun time of year. But one of the things that we do annually is we do our nominations, where we look for the next class of leaders to rise up among our church and to be in roles where they can help us to live into the future that God has for us. Now, I will tell you that we have lots of wisdom in our current leadership. What we don't have right now in our current leadership is a lot of folks who can be mentored. And so my first charge to you is to begin to look around and see who is it that you can help mentor for the next generation. Who can you help mentor into these roles of leadership? And so if you are on our nominations team, those are some of the questions we're going to be looking at is yes, we want people that already have the wisdom, the insight, the knowledge to lead in areas such as finance and trustees and staff parish relations. But we also want folks that we can help bring in and mentor into those roles. It's interesting to me, so often when I meet with families, as we are, when a loved one has died, and I have the privilege of meeting with the family and talking through the service, and then talking through what that message will look like as we celebrate the life of the one they loved, one of the questions I often ask is, what did you learn from them? What did they teach you? What gifts do you look back and say, I got this from my mom, I got this from my father, I got this from my grandparent? Friends, we all pass on those gifts. We all pass on that learning. And I think it's time for us to bring some awareness to this so that we can encourage it and continue to lift that up. There are things that you bring to this body of brothers and sisters that we would not get anywhere else. And they are important and valuable. So the things that we teach, the things that we pass on are critical. So as if you consider yourself, I'm not going to tell you who's a senior adult, I'm not getting into that. If you consider yourself to be a senior adult, what are we learning from you? How are you sharing your wisdom with this congregation? In what ways can you do that, in perhaps in different ways? How are you sharing your wisdom? Now, the flip side of this is, and Paul goes into a great deal of detail about how we care for widows. And again, we've got to look at context. In this time, in this place, in this culture and society and context, widows were really marginalized. They were dependent on their husband's family to care for them. And if there wasn't anybody willing to offer that care, they had no recourse. Very rarely did they have their own funding. Very rarely did they have the financial ability to provide for themselves. And so you hear this concern about the widows throughout Scripture, simply because their role and their place did not provide for them. And so there is a special concern for the needs of those who are not receiving care in other ways. So how does that apply to us as a congregation? Now, we don't have, as Paul was trying to encourage Timothy here, we don't have a roll of widows, meaning we don't have you register your widowed status with us in order that we might provide your funding. That was the way the church worked in the very, very early years. We don't have that. And you hear in this letter this push for families to really care for one another. And so I want us to step back and think a little bit about what it means for us to care, not just for our widows, but for all of our senior adults. And I will tell you that this congregation has a long history of seeking to care for our senior adults, especially as things in their life change and they become in need of more care. Our lay pastoral care team has been around for at least 10, maybe 12 years. And if you're not at all familiar with the lay pastoral care team, let me let you in on a wonderful secret. This is a team of lay folk, which is a weird word that we use for all of you who are not ordained. Okay, so you're all lay folk, mostly. Sorry. And these folks have stepped up and said, for people that cannot stay connected physically with the congregation for whatever reason, if there are issues that keep them more home-centered than they had been in earlier years, less mobile, less able physically to be present, then we will take church to them. We will represent the church and maintain relationship, and we will visit, and we will send cards, and we will be engaged, and we will keep that connection. This is what our lay pastoral care team does. And I will tell you, for those of you who obviously are still able to come and participate and be engaged, I will tell you that everywhere you're sitting, someone else has sat that no longer can be here. And so we have not only an obligation, but a privilege to maintain connection with our senior adults who cannot be here anymore. Now, I guess I should ask this question. I'm probably going to get the response that I think I'll get, but you always surprise me. So how many of you are super excited and counting down the number of days until you finally get to go into a nursing home? That's pretty much what I thought your response was going to be. I mean, for the most part, most of us would say that's not exactly my goal in life, to end my life and be in a nursing home. And yet at the same time, every single one of us is aware of how valuable having that kind of facility and care is, right? I mean, I would imagine that we would all raise our hands if we know or have known someone who benefited from the services provided in skilled nursing care, yes? You can raise your hand. It's all good. That's what I thought. That's exactly what I thought. It's a hard conversation to have as we go from being, busy and active and in charge of our own world and leading all kinds of things to recognizing that all of a sudden we're slowly slowing down. Our bodies aren't quite doing all the things our bodies used to be able to do. Our needs have changed. It is really hard to navigate those waters. And as a congregation, we have a calling. In fact, I would say we have a mandate as brothers and sisters to walk that journey alongside one another. And yet it's a tricky journey. It's hard to do. How many of you have had that delightful conversation with your adult children about where you're going from here? Not from church, but after you, thank you, okay. But, let's assume that some of you are still living in your homes, and so you've had those conversations. They can be challenging conversations. I remember having this conversation with my mother. It went really well. So my mother had been diagnosed with Parkinson's, and if you're aware of Parkinson's, it is a progressive degenerative disease, and it takes all kinds of forms, but the idea of being able to live alone in her home as her Parkinson's progressed probably wasn't going to be a reality. So before we got there, being the good daughter that I am, I went down to have that conversation with her, and she wasn't ready, and it went really lousy. And finally I asked her, I said, Mom, what are you going to do when you can't live at home anymore? And she gave the answer that I know has been on all of your minds if you were asked that question. Well, I'll just die. Right? And I said, so in the event that you need different kinds of care and you've not yet died, what are we supposed to do? And we resolved that there was no resolution for that. It's a hard conversation. And so your senior adult ministry team, in partnership with the Wesleyan Homes, will be bringing an event to our congregation in September. It's September 23rd, if you want to make notes, because you're writing on a piece of paper you're taking home anyway. September 23rd in the afternoon, we will have a guest speaker whose name is Jim Comer, and Jim has done much work on how you have that conversation, how you begin to look at the next phase of life. It is in your worship guide, but we're looking for ways to help facilitate those conversations in a way that is grace-filled and loving, and provides all of us the opportunity to walk side by side, because friends, every single one of us is a day older than we were yesterday. We just keep doing this. And it is incumbent on us as brothers and sisters to care for one another. Paul was very, very concerned about ensuring that all of the people in the congregation were cared for appropriately. And he had a particular concern that as young Timothy came in among this flock, that young Timothy recognized and supported the wisdom that the elders, the senior adults, had to offer. And so, friends, I want you to hear me, that I want not only to learn from you, but there are others among us who want to learn from you. And at the same time, when we talk about wisdom, I don't mean you are the expert. I don't mean that you come in with all the answers. I mean that you bring the insight of a life that has been lived reflectively and honestly and authentically. And you're willing to hear and share and learn and grow, just as every one of us is seeking to learn and grow and share. And as things in your life change, rather than hide it at home or pretend it's not happening, let us, your church family, walk this path with you. And for those of you who are not in that place yet, step up. It is time for us to be in relationship with those who cannot participate anymore. You can do this. You will be amazed at what you learn. You will be amazed at how your life, your spirit, your soul is fed. You remember last week we had several folks share their stories of participating in mission, and every one of them said, I got more than I gave. I promise, as you begin to be and share in life with some of our most fragile seniors, you will gain more than you get. Over the next several weeks, as our Senior Adult Ministries continues to identify ways that we can do the work that we're called to do in a faithful and effective and meaningful way, we need to hear from you. So if you're in a Sunday school class or a small group, I want you to invite me and a couple of members of the Senior Adult team to come and listen. We're going to do a listening tour on Senior Adult Ministries. I want to hear what you need. I want to hear what you're seeing that needs to happen. And then, friends, we're going to stand up here and once again tell you, and we need you to volunteer. There is not one ministry that takes place in this church that doesn't require somebody to step up and help. And yes, you are that somebody. You really are that somebody. And so what a gift it is that we can come together, that we can learn from the wisdom of our elders, that we can care for and love those who are walking that last part of the journey. This is an incredible gift we have been given, and it is also a calling. Let us then be faithful to answer that call. Amen. Amen.